there's a few different memes, kind of a layered meme approach this time. So I know you're not on the internet, so I want to explain it to you because every joke is better after being explained, right?
That's what I've been told repeatedly by you.
Yikes. Anyway, so there's a meme from the Top Gear, the British car show.
Of course.
Where Jeremy Clarkson.
Okay, the original. Okay.
Yeah, the original. Where Jeremy Clarkson says, "Oh no." Anyway, so
that's very, very British humor, isn't it?
Very, very British. And like the first time you see, you read the prologue of the night of Gavilar's assassination. You read about Gavilar being assassinated. You don't really know anything about who he is or his importance to Alethkar or like the events of the world. So you're just kind of like, no. Anyway, but then, the second time you read it, you actually are pretty invested because oh no, that's Dalinar's big brother, that's Yasna's dad. Oh man, it's so sad. But then the fifth time you see Gavilar being assassinated, you're like, Baby Yoda watching The Mandalorian, shoot people. Die, trash. Yes, Grogu, but he's Baby Yoda to me.
I'm not completely uncultured.
Yeah, he's Baby Yoda to me.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, welcome to Cosmere Casual, your casual reader's guide for the Cosmere Curious. I'm your co-host, the bloodthirsty Nick Gorman.
And I'm your co-host, AJ Gorman, who apparently knows way more about Star Wars than I'm willing to admit.
Yeah, but you've seen all the movies, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we saw...
I don't think I'm caught up on all of the TV shows right now.
No, I'm not either, frankly. Anyway, today is not a Star Wars episode. Today is one of our post-read episodes for The Way of Kings, Book 1 in the Stormlight Archive.
Spoilers abound.
Spoilers for the Stormlight Archive only abound. Like we've talked about in previous episodes, this is such a meaty book that we're trying to break it apart into different pieces. And there is so much foreshadowing in this book that we wanted to,
take an entire episode to talk about it.
Because there's seeds that are planted here that come to fruition later. We want to talk about those because some of them are easy to miss. And I don't know, they help me to understand, what, to make the twists later, feel better.
Right. And it's also just trying to recognize Brandon's brilliance.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to miss some of his more brilliant toss-ins.
Yeah.
They're easy to miss.
But we're going to avoid spoilers for anything else in the Cosmere. And when I go through and edit it, I'll make sure that any of those get bleeped out or cut anyway. So, spoilers for the rest of the Stormlight Archive. No spoilers.
Up until this point, which is the entirety of Arc 1.
Yes, so through Wind and Truth.
Yes. Oh. So to start, everyone's radiant.
Yeah, speak on that.
Yeah, so there's way more radiance than what most people originally think the first time they read it. So obviously...
You mean it's not just Shallan and Kaladin?
Nope.
Shucks.
So we do find at the very end that Yasna is a radiant. I don't think we ever kind of subscribe her name to radiant in the same sentence, but she can soul cast, she's a radiant, or at least on her way to being a radiant. We should probably take a moment. So surge binding is when you have the ability to use the surges. Radiant is when you are a surge binder who also follows the teachings of the radiance. There's a difference.
You've taken oaths.
Yeah, you've taken oaths. So yeah, a radiant is a surge binder who has been bound by oaths.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of it means different things to different people, right?
And sometimes we're sloppy and we say radiant when we really should be saying surge binder. But
yeah, because we see like Teft telling Kaladin that he's not a radiant yet.
Correct.
I forget whether that's in this book or the next one.
No, it's this one.
Yeah, but then we also see people who are less far along in their journey in Rhythm of War and Wind and Truth, and they're called Radiants, but they're squires. They're not full Radiants.
Yeah, but they are connected to an oathed Radiant.
Right.
Because for context, before the last distillation, everybody, like people who had these abilities were surge binders. They were not actually.
Yeah, but like Kalek mentions, that they have the Radiance now. So like there's overlap.
There's a whole conversation with Noadon about talking about surge binders and they need to be better and stuff like that. So
right.
Okay. refocusing. So we do find out that Yasna is a Surgebinder / Radiant by the end of the book. There were lots of teasers within this book to kind of foreshadow that. Very first time that we see her soul cast, kind of when we first meet her, there's a comment about her being kind of disoriented after soul casting the rock in the palace.
Right.
So now that you've, presuming that you've read the rest of the Stormlight series, that's her kind of readjusting her perspective from the cognitive realm back into the physical realm.
Is that unique to Radiants who need to look into the cognitive realm? Or I thought even like in Oathbringer, the interlude with the soulcaster trying to make her way to Eomeya, I thought she also uses her Fabrial to look into Shadesmar and do soul casting. I thought that was more common.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, yes, she definitely is disoriented and everything, but I thought that was just more about like she was looking into the cognitive realm.
Oh. Well, even beyond that, like sometimes she seems to kind of be shaking her head or talking to herself. She's really talking to her Inksprin.
Yeah. Well, and like she does, Shallan notes that Yasna seems to be able to do things with her soulcaster that are supposed to be impossible to do with soulcasters, like soul casting from a distance. Right? But
yes.
If you think about what the powers Elsecallers have, where they've got the surges of transformation and transportation, well, that makes sense that you could use them together to soulcast from a distance. So that's like, yeah.
I never put that together.
Yeah.
That it was those powers combined. Because
Right.
It's always confused me, because we've really only seen soul casting from Shallan's perspective. And we know that soul casting Shallan's a very, very special case.
Right.
And I don't understand why Shallan has more struggles transforming objects than most other people. And the way that we see Yasna soulcast is extremely different from just soulcasting is one big kind of blur, and I feel like Brandon very purposefully in Wind and Truth never really explained it.
Right. I was about to say, I think there's more to come on that, because right now it seems very soft, and like there's a lot of things
mysterious.
That aren't. Yeah, it's very mysterious, right? Because, but the way it's been explained so far, like especially in Words of Radiance, is that it's got an element that's personality driven, and that Shallan, her persona that she's adopting for the things that she's trying to do, takes on a very passive, unauthoritative persona, and that makes it more difficult for her to persuade things to change.
Yeah, but that it doesn't make sense. Like, how are you ever going to convince a soul to change into quartz?
You're not wrong.
Like, that doesn't one and one doesn't equal two in this case to me. It doesn't make sense.
No, I don't disagree with you, but that's sort of how it's been explained so far. There does seem to be things missing, though.
Well, the other thing that it was small, and then we haven't seen another example of, was Shallan was looking through the pages, through her drawings, and she was thinking to herself, there was also the one of Yasna burning words after running out of ink. And she was amazed at the soulcaster's precision. Like, that doesn't make sense to any of the rules of soulcasting that has been explained to us. Because she's like...
Yeah, you're right, though, because... I mean, she could...
I mean, that sounds more like another Radiant. There are other Radiants that can, like, do fire and very precise.
The Dustbringers. The Releasers, excuse me.
Right.
I have other thoughts. Oh, crap, I'm not supposed to be talking about other Cosmere stuff. We'll come back to that.
I'll make a note of that. So, yeah, and so none of that really makes sense to me. What does make sense is kind of we have kind of it's kind of explained to us a little bit, I think, that Shallan is deeply kind of traumatized. We don't really understand the full extent, but I think that's somewhat easy to kind of understand. Obviously she killed her father, something's going on, and Kaladin has seen lots of trauma. Those are we know that is most likely somehow part of the process of becoming a Surgebinder / Radiant. And presumably, Yasna does not fit that until we see the night where she destroys those robbers. And Shallan thinks to herself, the way that she talks about those men, Shallan thinks to herself,
oh, she's broken. Yeah.
She's broken. What was done to you?
Yeah.
And who did it?
Which we still haven't seen, the full extent of, like, there's hints about it, especially in the...
There are hints that it's Amaram, but I think that's too easy.
I don't know. Because I need to go back and reread the prologue to Words of Radiance, but she had some kind of an event that was alluded to in there where nobody else seems to really remember it, and it's not clear if she was kidnapped or if she had a mental breakdown and was the Ardents tried to help her in the same way that they, treat other people having mental breakdowns in,
Stick it on cold dark room and don't pay attention to them.
Yeah, and it's like, so something happened there, and she basically had to pull through it by herself, and nobody else noticed.
Yeah.
Right?
But I think it is something to do with someone overpowering her in some way. And it all just really makes me want to know more about Yasna's other wards and more of her history. I think I said this in another episode.
Yeah.
But there was a kind of a side comment that I think Capsule said this, that Yasna has a history of corrupting those whom she comes in contact.
Right. I don't know. Capsule, unreliable guy, that one.
Doesn't mean he doesn't have
grains
of truth.
That's true. Still,
we know he was a
fake ardent,
ghost blood. So
yes,
he probably had more information than the other people. Okay, this next person, who's also, I think, could have been a budding radiant, that I know you don't agree with, but Gaz.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you? Yeah. Tell me more.
So he sees things from the corner of his eye.
Right.
We see that over and over and over again.
Yeah.
He couldn't stop that feeling that something hid in that darkness. He couldn't see, but others could. What lurked there? Spren that would drain his soul from his body? If he's a radiant, I mean, kinda, yeah.
What paranoia does not a radiant make, right?
Okay, but why? But that sentence, Spren that would drain his soul from his body? I mean, that's
right.
Kind of like a really dark description of a Spren bond, because there is kind of an exchange that...
Well, he's superstitious and afraid of Voidbringers, right? Like, that's the way I read that, and he's missing the other thing where he's not, like, yes, he's got some self-loathing going on, but he's not doing anything really that would attract a cryptic, right? He's not living a lie.
He's sending men to die.
Right, but he's not. And
he thinks to himself, Stormfather, I hate myself for being a part of this.
Right, but where's the truthiness? Like, where's the delicious lie, right? Where's something that would attract a cryptic out of that?
I don't think it's necessarily cryptic.
I mean, yeah, 'cause even though he does ultimately bond a cryptic, he could have been,
Yeah, I mean...
he could have been attracting another kind.
Right, because, I mean, Syl was following Kaladin for over a year.
Right, but he was always trying to protect people ever since, especially since Tien died. But even, while he was trying to look after Tien, he was always trying to, he's always protecting other people ahead of his own interests.
Just saying, I don't think we know enough to say that he wasn't.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I don't see it.
Okay. Well, I see it, and that's my headcanon.
Okay.
That he was on his way to becoming a Radiant on his own.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, Elhokar.
Elhokar, definitely.
So I remember being just flummoxed when you told me this like a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That Elhokar was becoming Radiant.
Yeah, he was seeing cryptics in the mirror. Like, he was worried. He was paranoid about assassins, right? But he was also, lying to himself about being, about his how good of a king he is or how bad of a king he is, right?
Yeah.
And he was, trying to make that true, and like that was the lie that would attract the cryptics. Is he wants to be better.
Yeah.
Right.
So just take a beat here.
Yeah.
Elhokar's paranoia was pretty well founded because he was seeing Spren in the mirror. So like it did kind of seem like people were after him.
I think it was more like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
But it's a lot more. It's easier to understand his paranoia
in the extent of it. Yeah.
In the extent of it, because like he does tell Dalinar and Sadeas that like he sees things in the mirrors and like they're after him.
Yeah. And with their strange symbol-headed shape, their symbol-shaped heads,
But obviously, like, they're not going to believe him. They didn't believe him. So, like,
yeah, Elhokar
makes a lot more sense having that in my brain.
Yes, yes.
And generally, we do think of Radiants as, they're good people that, spread and bond good people. And Dalinar keeps reminding us that there are 3 or 4 instances where Dalinar specifically says, like, but the king is more complex a man than many give him credit for, and he could be a really good king. Dalinar is constantly reminding us that he's a good person.
You said something that I don't agree with.
Okay.
I don't think that Spren... I don't think it's as simple as Spren try to bond good people, right? I think that's overly reductive. They tried to bond people who matched their intents, right?
Yes.
And so I forget which Spren the Dustbringers bond, but there's serious doubts about whether the Dustbringers, whether they would align with the side of the humans, right?
But what I just said is kind of what the assumption that Dalinar and his advisors are.
Okay.
Which is why they get into such trouble in Wind and Truth. But anyways.
Fair. And Oathbringer, and anyway. It's just always...
And it's something that I think we were, as readers, were under the illusions until book 3 or 4.
Gotcha. Okay.
I do. At one point, Elhokar said, the past is irrelevant. I only look forward. Such a Lightweaver mindset.
Yeah. Well, and it's also not at all true. Maybe aspirational, but...
But that's exactly how Shallan thinks,
Exactly, though, yeah. Yeah. And
she doesn't very purposely trains herself not to think of the past.
But I thought that had... Okay. And I guess... Okay. And the same thing might be going on with Elhokar. But for Shallan, it was because her past was too painful for her to look at. And so she had all these coping mechanisms to avoid thinking about it, pretending it didn't exist. I don't know that Elhokar does the same thing, though, because...
Well, not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, he's constantly thinking about his father.
Another point to just kind of say is that Elhokar hadn't fully bonded to Spredden, but he was able to take in Stormlight. And that is why 8 of the 10 sapphires used in his plate were cracked following the battle of the
with the chasm fiend.
With the chasm fiend.
Yeah, right, because he was sucking in the Stormlight, and that even the sphere. They never found out who put the defective spheres in there because the spheres were never defective. It was he was drawing in Stormlight on top of the amount that the plate was drawing out of them too, and that caused even the good spheres to crack.
Yeah, so I think it's very important to note that you don't have to have a fully bonded Spren to start using Stormlight.
Yes.
And it's worth noting that, like, Elhokar was kind of well on his way to actually, like, undertaking the oaths and becoming, like, a better person in order to kind of say those oaths. There's one quote here, Dalinar blinked. Just several weeks ago, Elhokar had been indignant when Dalinar had merely mentioned the idea of turning back. What had changed? Because he was willing to kind of accept it and consider it, the idea. So, like, I think he was going down the path. And you had mentioned the other day that in what book? Die Hard.
Rhythm of War for the audience out there.
That Elhokar was, the more time that he spent with Shallan, like the more progress he was kind of making towards that.
Oh, you mean Words of Radiance? He was dead by...
Oh, that's right. Words of Radiance. Sorry. And it was the Spren that was hoping to kind of bond with Elhokar is the one that Hoyd took.
Yeah. Ultimately becomes Design.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of a big deal.
I don't know. I think we got to save my thoughts on that until the Oathbringer post-read episode. Because I guess we can talk about it now, but I'm not sure. I almost wonder if wit became the king's wit because he could tell that he had that fortune sensing that there is a radiant bond about to form here. And we don't know exactly why, but we do know that he's trying to collect as many different types of investiture as he can.
Oh, he was looking for an opportunity to steal.
Yeah. Or at least be nearby when it happens, right? Find a way to use it. Use it to his advantage. I'm not so he doesn't seem like the kind to put, detailed plans exactly like that. But I think, he just wanted to look for an opportunity, right? Sort of the same way that Sadeas, is always, explains at the end of this book that, I've always got plans going on. I just saw my opportunity and I took it.
Yeah, I don't know his act on those plans. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he was setting up and just not sure exactly what he was going to do, but being ready for it when it happened.
Yeah, because I don't think you can kind of steal the bond. I mean...
Well, there's a word of Brandon that says you can.
Okay. Well.
It just involves hemalurgy and a lot of pain.
Well, I don't think Wit would go down that road, but I guess we don't really know much about him, so could be. Anyways, the thing that hit me on this reread is I don't know why it never kind of registered with me that Shallan was seeing cryptics out of the corner of her eyes too.
Yeah, you explained that to me like yesterday or something, and I I was like, what? Huh? What? I only ever noticed them in her drawings.
No, they were in the corners of her eyes, and she was noticing them in the hospital room. Yeah, I've got a quote here. At sometimes she thought she saw them out of the corners of her eyes. At others, she could hear them whispering. She hadn't dared speak back to them again. So reading that this time, maybe the difference was because I was actually reading it and not listening to it.
I still missed it. I was reading it. So many little teeny tiny little seeds that are
But the exact same language, the exact same description of seeing cryptics out of the corners of the eyes. Elakari and Shallan, both same book.
and apparently Gaz.
Yep.
I'm still. You might be convincing me.
And you told me that there were words of Brandon to say that Gaz was not, and I looked it up in the Arcanum, and I couldn't find anything that was
I was wrong.
at all related to that.
I was wrong. You were right.
I don't know. Maybe there's quotes missing out of Arcanum.
Unlikely. And if there are, then I certainly don't know them.
Okay.
Any other
Yeah.
books?
Oh yeah, TN.
Yes. Which I didn't. I was trying to look out for clues, and I still couldn't find them. Like, what are the clues that he was about to bond up his friend?
Yeah, so they're subtle, and it's not until you understand more about light weavers that it really starts to kind of sink in. So light weavers, however Shallan tends to do it with drawings, but she draws people kind of a better version of them. Not until the second book, but
Because it has to do with her ability to look into the spiritual realm by having two bonds, and she doesn't have two bonds yet.
but she can do that as a normal. It happens as a normal light weaver, not just because you have two bonds.
That's not what Rastari says in Wind and Truth.
I don't know. Here's the thing. So
He's not the most reliable. All right, continue. What was Tien doing? What was Tien doing that made you think that clued you in that he was like?
So think about, all right, we're engineers, right? So equal and opposite reactions, right? So while a light weaver can kind of think of somebody else as being better, and it actually affects that person and how they see themselves.
Okay.
So Tien, this was hit over and over and over again in the flashbacks, was always able to lift Kaladin out of his moods. It was only ever Tien that was able to do this, and that's very much a light weaver thing. And while he was not kind of someone who drew in that kind of artist path, he was always noticing the beauty in rocks, and it's really noticing that beauty and appreciating that beauty is kind of what attracts Spren. And we see that in some of the later flashbacks that he becomes, he's an amazing wood carver, like able to do these kind of fantastic horses and all these things. And Kaladin's always remarking that, yet inexplicably, he did feel better. And it's something that other people notice too. Laurel says, your brother, he changes you. Like, it's hit over and over and over again.
All right, you're convincing me on this one too.
Yeah.
I definitely, my first several read-throughs didn't put that together, but yeah, I thought it was just, he just gets him, right? They've got that connection, because that's another thing that also comes up.
Yeah.
It can be both, but you're convincing me.
Okay. But yeah, it's like, it's not until you understand more about light weavers and kind of their effect on other people that foreshadowing, it all makes sense.
And the way I like to think about that as well, about the nature of light weavers and how they can maybe sometimes change people, is it's a combination of their light weaving ability, their ability to make illusions, as well as their ability to transform. And so they fake it till they make it.
Yeah.
Except, like, they really do.
Yeah, except
they really do.
Okay. So that's Tien. And then
how many more budding radiants did? Because I'm like,
all right, one more.
That's about it.
One more
that I picked up on clues on. So like
Teft.
Oh,
there's
damn it,
one
you did tell me.
clue in there that either Teft is already starting to attract a Spren, or he's already showing signs of being a squire to Kaladin. At the Battle of the Tower, kind of towards the end of the battle, Teft, has a small line where he says that his wounded arm didn't seem to hurt as much as it should.
Yeah.
I think he took in Stormlight.
Yeah. Whereas I think the way he sees that situation is more like adrenaline rush, or he's gotten stronger.
But
yada,
I mean,
yada. But you're right.
he's a experienced soldier. Like, he would have known how adrenaline affects him. I don't think he would have kind of remarked to himself that.
And the other supporting detail that goes with that is that he is the first one to bridge 4, other than Kaladin, to bond his friend.
And he's the one who's most closely, like, it's him and Rock that are most closely kind of aligned with Kaladin. Like, knows the plans and
Moash.
Perhaps.
Because I think Moash is definitely, I almost see Moash and Teft as being his most trusted advisors. It isn't, until later that Rock really, with the stews.
But, I mean, second in command is Teft, not Moash. At this time in the book, like, Teft...
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, I guess you're right.
So it makes sense to me that he would kind of be already showing signs of squirehood.
But he's still, like, the way he and Moash interact is special.
Yes.
Even still, where Kaladin, even at this point, has that rebellious streak in him, and Moash reciprocates that towards Cal. And I think that, they noticed that already, and they're starting to have a special friendship.
Yeah. That special friendship is definitely happening. I think somewhere in this book, Cal was saying that he felt more comfortable with Moash because Moash wasn't treating him as some deity like most of the others were.
Yeah.
So Teft, and then I did want to talk a little bit about Kaladin and the Stormfather.
Okay. Yeah.
Kaladin and the Stormfather do not make sense to me. Even on these rereads, even after finishing Arc 1. It's like a whole different plot line.
I almost wonder if there was something that got cut, right? But, looking back after having finished Wind and Truth, I'm wondering if this is supposed to be like planting the seeds for Kaladin becoming a herald later.
That's what I think too.
But, something about
because
he's the only one who's son of Tanavast, right?
Yes. Yep. And Tanavast is the vessel of honor.
Yes.
Or was the vessel of honor.
But also the person whose memories that the cognitive shadow, known as the Stormfather, has. That was a very complicated sentence for me. Right.
Because the Stormfather is a cognitive shadow and a Spren.
Yes.
Which is...
It's a Venn diagram. Are all Spren cognitive shadows? No, I don't think. Maybe.
There's some type of invested entity. I don't know.
Well, right, but those are like different types of categorization, right?
But it's almost like the Stormfather's bonding Cal already, because he's able to bring him into a vision of the storm and talk to him about the oath pact being broken.
I mean, I didn't look at that as a type of a Nihil bond, right?
Yeah.
I looked at that as more like the Stormfather, as a bondsmith Spren, was able to manipulate the connection that it felt with Kaladin. Okay. And Kaladin does have a connection with the High Storms, right? When they're not there, he gets into a seasonal funk. Right? And it might not be much of a connection at this point. It becomes more of a connection later.
Yeah.
Right? Because of how he is able to, as a windrunner, ride the storms, and that, further bolsters a connection that might have already been there. But I think it's probably enough of a connection for the Stormfather to use it.
Yeah, I forgot about the connection part, and he could have just been...
There's so much!
That makes much more sense, thinking about it from that perspective. Okay.
That's like we should make a podcast to explain and break down all the... Oh.
Okay. I want to talk about a little bit about Renarin. Because particularly...
there's a lot of people who talk about Renarin behind his back. All those light eyes. I'm sorry.
Knowing where his kind of relationship ends at the end of Arc 1 with... Rlain.
I didn't think the relationship ended at the end of Wind.
Well, at the end of Arc 1, we know... Anyways.
Yeah.
It was very interesting reading about the introduction to kind of Renarin in this book, because he's described as very little emotion shown on his face. He's hesitant before he replies. He's very straightforward, and he feels like he's caught between two worlds, like he has no value, because he's light eyes, but he can't fight, and he also doesn't feel like it's right for him to go to the Ardentia, so he doesn't feel like there's a place for him.
Well, and also he's got that blood sickness, the fits, right?
Right, that's why he can't fight.
But it does more. Like, it also undermines him, in social ways. Like, there people can be things other than warriors, right?
Yeah.
But underlying blood sickness really does
prevents him from doing it.
from being a full member of society.
So all of that sounded very much on par with what we know about R'Lane once we understand his full history.
Yes. I'm trying to think, because Renarin
so it makes a lot more sense about why these two people would kind of come together.
Right.
Knowing that they have very kind of similar histories. Obviously they're coming from two very different cultures, but there's a lot of similarities of kind of how they came up.
Yeah, I'm going to pause here and go figure out why the kids are fighting. What are we talking about?
Renarin and R'Lane.
Right, but for Renarin, he seems like he's coded as being on the autism spectrum, right? He's not the only one in this book series, right? Whereas R'Lane seems, I didn't get the same vibes from him as being, as being coded as autistic so much as just being an outcast for other reasons, right?
Yeah.
But yes, there is a lot of commonality there, but yeah.
The other thing that kind of hit me about Renarin was I still don't understand during the Chasm Fiend hunt why he rode out.
Because he was concerned.
I know, but it's still a dumb shit thing to do.
Oh my god, he had a fight or flight reaction, and he chose to fight.
Which was wrong.
Wrong? Yeah. Well, that's how it goes in stressful situations. You make wrong decisions.
I get in the narrative that, Dalinar needed something to push him to promise to give Renarin the plate, but it just still seemed like way too stupid of a move to believe.
No. I got it entirely. And it's especially because Renarin doesn't normally go to battle, right? So this is probably the first time he's actually seen with his own eyes his father being in danger. And I don't think he would disagree with you.
Okay.
It's also not the last time he does something like that. In Words of Radiance, he joins the duel to try to help his brother.
Oh, that's true.
He could not be of any help.
At least he had plate on that time.
No, he didn't.
Renarin had plate on.
I didn't think he had time to get his plate on. And he couldn't...
No, he put his plate.
Oh, he did put his plate on? Okay. It's been a little while since I reread it, so, okay.
Yeah, he had plate.
Yeah, but he was still...
It was... Because...
He was unable to...
Because if there were... Because you needed to have Kaladin be the only one without plate.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, but he was still... Yeah, he could not be of any help because he couldn't... He was in such pain from the shard blade he had bonded.
Right. Okay, but let's talk about Adolin.
My favorite himbo.
I want to take a moment and pause and reflect on Adolin's path. Because there was a lot of foreshadowing that I noticed on this reread that I just completely did not register before. The overwhelming thing that we get from Adolin in this book is mostly his concern for his father.
Concern and frustration in equal measures.
Yes. There are moments where we see him kind of struggling under his father's shadow. But they're not the overwhelming thing. We do see a little bit of his fashion sense in moments. Probably a little bit stronger than being under his father's shadow. We definitely see him being a people pleaser, trying to be friendly with everybody. And there are those moments where he kind of begrudges that other light eyes have leisure time and he's working. I mean, he's very much still a child in this first book, still growing up. Well, I mean, he's not a complete child, but the fact that,
he's immature. Especially when you compare him to Dalinar, yeah.
Or even just compare him in this book to book 5. There's a world of difference.
Yeah.
But the thing that kind of struck me was there was a comment in part 4, but I don't want to be High Prince, Adolin complained. Not yet, at least. That's a huge qualifier, and I think Brandon very purposely had that, but I don't want to be High Prince all by itself, and then broke it up with Adolin complained, and then added that qualifier after. I think the structure of those sentences was very purposeful to kind of highlight the fact that he doesn't want to be High Prince, and I had not noticed that on my previous rereads, because that's where we end up.
Well, and he hasn't noticed it either. But yeah, it's definitely he's doing some because the way I read it when he structures the sentence that way is that there is a pause there, and so he's yes.
So he said what he felt, and then he's like, okay, well, I can't.
This is how I ought to be feeling.
This is how, yeah.
At least not yet.
This is how I have to add to it to make it acceptable for the people hearing it. Which is really just him in his head, but
And I don't think...
Or, no, it wasn't in his head. He was saying this out loud.
Well, and I don't think he gets there until after he's talked to Azure.
Yeah.
But then after that, I think he understands a little bit more about how he's feeling.
Right. But Azure was book 3.
Yes.
So I just... The foreshadowing started here in book 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not... Yeah. I'm not sure if that's foreshadowing so much as just, like, that's his character arc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, it...
Yeah.
I don't think I remembered that.
You.
I didn't see this. I didn't
you.
remark on this comment previously. Obviously, there's also foreshadowing for the duel.
What?
Very first chapter, Adolin thinks Adolin's explaining it to us, the readers, that he just hates Sadeas, and that most of the time he duels people when they complain or
when they
whatever,
talk about
when they
shit about
talk
his name.
shit. Yes, but he was lamenting that he couldn't do that with Sadeas. You didn't duel High Princess. It just wasn't done.
Yeah.
Not unless you were ready to make a big storm of it.
Yeah. So that's okay. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're putting down.
So the duel was already like that's all. It's all the foreshadowing there.
Yeah. I guess
Says
I wasn't thinking of that so much as yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe it is.
And then in that very first chapter where we meet Adolin, Dalinar tells him, "Son, you have to stop fixating on him." And it takes 2 books to play out, but
he does stop fixating. Well, no, actually, honestly, he still keeps fixating on him through book. Yeah. Anyway.
But I mean, he tells us right up front, Adolin and Sadeas.
I don't know if that's foreshadowing so much as just explaining their existing relationship and how they hate each other.
Yeah, why not both? Porque
Yeah.
no los dos?
Yeah.
There are also hints that Adolin is kind of recognizing that his blade is more than a blade, and that he has a special bond with it. So we don't see that. We see this more in book 2, but it does start here in book 1. One of the battles, I forget which one it was. Adolin says he could sense energy racing along its blade as if it were eager.
He's starting to get that emotional connection with Maya Lauren.
Yes. I don't know if you want to take this opportunity, since we're talking about shard blades, to talk about the cheese cutting.
No.
Okay. Another time. Moash. So Moash.
Moash.
I only have one note in here, but there was a moment where they're practicing in the chasms, and Kaladin very specifically notes that there are kind of 12 spheres lighting up Moash, and there are 12 shadows. Moash is 12 shadows.
Right, but I still don't understand what that's foreshadowing or presaging, because Odium's number is 9, right? So I just thought that was, a dramatic moment in terms of, oh, they're spooky in the chasms. Their only source of light is the spheres. There's all these shadows being spooky.
I don't know. I think it's meaningful. I don't completely understand it, but I'm going to keep it in mind. I'm going to keep it in mind as I keep doing this reread.
We got to figure out which shard is associated with the number 12. I guess for folks who are, maybe casual, like we're allegedly a casual reader's guide to the Cosmere, there's a theory. I think it's starting to become more and more, fleshed out in the text, but each of the shards of Adonalsium has a number associated with it, right? So Honor's number is 10. The Oath Pact has, there's 10 heralds in the Oath Pact. There's 10 kingdoms. 10, 10, 10 keeps showing up around Honor. Odium has the number 9. Preservation has the number 16. And,
Yep.
There's there's obviously other shards. We just don't know, what their associated numbers are.
Yep. So I'll keep that in mind. Let's talk about Shallan.
We've already talked about Shallan.
Yeah, but
All right, tell me more.
So we know that she's a Radiant, or she's on her way to becoming a Radiant. But there's so many signs that we should not trust Shallan.
Yeah, she's a very unreliable narrator.
And as someone who just refuses to believe that unreliable narrators exist,
how could they be unreliable? They're the one telling the story.
I know.
Oh my God.
It's such a struggle for me.
Yeah.
So here's some things to think about. She very specifically tells us that she tends to avoid thinking about things that make her uncomfortable. She references a weapon that she has but doesn't use, and it would take 10 heartbeats
Yeah.
to summon. So she has a shard blade.
Right. And I understand how people can miss it, because it's like a one-liner in a 1,200-page book. I get that.
Well, no. She references it at least 3 or 4 times, and I missed them all from the first 4 rereads.
And like I picked up on one of those my first read through, and so like I was very proud of myself when her shard blade finally does manifest in Words of Radiance, and I was like, called it. Anyway.
Yeah, I have this quote here. It was the only thing she had resembling a weapon. She was helpless. Except storms, she thought, frantic. I can't use that. I promised myself. She began the process anyways. 10 heartbeats to bring forth the fruit of her sin. So,
and people say that Brando doesn't have good prose. He just, he's a little selective about when he breaks it out.
He's very selective. And we, of course, know that Shardblade is because she had actually bonded a friend in her childhood and then broken her oath. So then it became a dead Shardblade.
Yeah. So I have another thing to mention about Shallan. When she's writing her letter to Yasna to, try to petition to be her ward again, she describes it as a lie built out of truths. She does that a lot, talking about lies built out of truths or truths built out of lies. And to me, that's laying the groundwork for explaining how cryptics work and what they're drawn to and like what's delicious lies, right? So I know pattern is not a part of the story yet, but when she's talking about it being a lie built out of truths, maybe to myself I said,
Delightful.
Yes, exactly. It's a delicious lie.
So we know that she bonded, at this point, we know that she bonded a Spren in her childhood. She broke her oath. My question is, was Shallan bonding her own Spren during the events of this book, or was she gaining abilities because of being a squire to Yasna?
Definitely the first. Definitely the first.
Okay. Because Shallan says herself, she says, what I did without it. Perhaps being near you has changed me somehow.
Right. But she's got Spren following her around as well as, I was saying like, no, it's definitely out of her own power. Or, the bond between her and Pattern. Right?
Maybe. I just like to have fun, kind of go down the roads.
Okay. Now.
Because we don't see Pattern until the next book on the ship.
I mean, depends on how. I mean, technically, we probably saw him in Shadesmar.
Potentially.
Yeah, we saw some sort of cryptic that she used.
I don't know if we
she
know.
drew power from to do the soul casting.
I don't know if we know enough about Squirehood and Radiance and to really tell.
I'm not a gambling person, but I'd still bet.
Okay. All right. Let's talk Voidbringers.
Oh, yeah. What do you want to talk about with the Voidbringers?
I have no idea.
Okay. So, because we had talked about, what sort of high-level beats we wanted to get into. Well, and I guess thinking about it in terms of what are the major plot twists, the major reveals, there's a couple of different plot twists around what's a Voidbringer, right? Because when you're first introduced to the book, they're just like they're a generic swearing, right? Oh, the Voidbringers are going to get you. They're boogeymen. Right? But at the end of this book, Yasna and Shallan are convinced that, oh no, the Voidbringers are the Parshmen, right? They're humble servants, and the desolations must be when the Parshmen suddenly cast off their shackles and turn into giant angry Voidbringers, right? And that societal upheaval is what causes the desolations. Now, we find out an Oathbringer.
It's a long road to understanding the history.
Right. It's a long road to understanding. Right, because there are things that don't quite make sense about that when you've got the rest of the context of everything you get through Wind and Truth, at least.
Because you never know when someone says Voidbringers, who are we actually talking about?
Right. Are we talking about are we talking about the Parshfolk after they've aligned with Odium? Are we talking about the humans who came from Ashen and brought Odium to Roshar? Are we talking about just the same generic boogeymen that all folk tales are made out of, right?
Right.
And so we get a lot of information, especially in the epigraphs of this book, about, the Voidbringers, right? And some of the epigraphs are death rattles, where people are seeing the future using the notoriously unreliable fortune, right? Sometimes people are seeing not the future, but just visions of fused or thunderclasts, and they call them Voidbringers, right? And then some of the other epigraphs are like literary fragments from the Dawn Singers or Shadow Days. And if they're written from the perspective of the Dawn Singers, who are singers, then those Voidbringers are humans, particularly human Surgebinders, right?
Right.
And so as you're going through and reading these epigraphs, there's a lot of noise to parse through about what are they talking about when they're talking about the Voidbringers, right? And it is very confusing.
Yeah. And it takes several books
Yeah.
to explain that, and then when you go back and reread, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
How do I interpret this again?
Yeah. And we're going to segue into the Sleepless. Speaking of, vague things that are...
I thought you were going to talk about Aharietium and
Oh,
Shinovar.
right. Yeah. If you're looking for it, there's a notable absence of Spren in the entire prelude, right? There's all these other details about, the corpses of things you recognize now as thunderclasts, as well as other things. But, there's no pain Spren. There's none of the other Spren that we associate with battlefields in literally every other description of battles in the Stormlight Archive, right? And so that absence of a detail, and especially when combined with the thing in, there's a one-liner in Rizen's interlude in this book about how Spren are less common in Shinovar. And that's one of the early clues that Aharietium, and particularly where the heralds left the honor blades, was located in Shinovar, right? And I hadn't put that together until this read-through. So, it's exciting.
I hadn't either, but also I don't know if it really had a huge impact on me. But
it didn't, but I don't know, I like those little consistency things, right?
Yeah.
Because, if it had been there, I probably would have been annoyed by it, right? Coming back and rereading it after Wind and Truth. So speaking of Aharietium and, knowing that I'm trying to segue into the Sleepless, one of the things, that's described is, in the prelude, there's different types of corpses with different colors of blood, right?
Yeah.
There's the human blood, red. The singer blood, which is orange.
And then there's violet.
There's violet. And mounds and stacks of, I forget how it's described, but it's, it's like kind of shapeless, right?
Yeah. So both Kremlings and Great Shells have this violet blood.
Right. And so it's likely that those are the Sleepless. They could be Great Shells, and particularly the Chasm Fiends. But my interpretation has always been that it was Sleepless who joined the fight on one side or the other.
And we haven't really gone into any history that talks about either of those parties partaking in the war.
Well, I thought there was something Wind and Truth about Chasm Fiends having previously joined on the side of Odium. But we also know that, metatextually, the blurbs on the back of the books are written from the perspective of the Sleepless. And so that's also how we know that the Sleepless are keeping tabs on our main point of view characters. And so if you wanted to just tick off, there's anytime that there's a strange Kremling mentioned, that one of our point of view characters notes a strange Kremling, that's one of the Sleepless trying to keep tabs on them. So there's a deep purple Kremling that Kaladin spots on the slave carts, and that's presumably a spy. Yeah, so there's a translucent Kremling that watches Kaladin during chasm duty, and I'm pretty sure that's a Sleepless. And I think we talked about in the Interludes episode that we kind of have a difference of opinion about the Kremling that Non-Balat tortures, whether or not that one's one of the Sleepless or not.
I think it is. My computer died.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we just disagree a little bit about whether the Kremling that Non-Balat tortures is a Sleepless or not. But, whatever. It doesn't ultimately, unless it picks up information that, becomes relevant, later that the Sleepless know, which, yeah, it probably isn't. Yeah, it doesn't really seem to matter that much.
We may never know.
You may never know. I did have a few, just sort of one-off bullets, I guess. I don't know. Is there anything else? So there's a lot of the information we get from Zeth in the prologue that is just, approximately right, but it represents his flawed understanding at the time that we're getting this.
Mm-hmm.
So he mentions that Voidbringers are supposed to be able to hold Stormlight perfectly while it leaks from humans. And he's right and he's wrong, right? The Fused can hold Voidlight indefinitely, right? But humans are the true Voidbringers that we already talked about. And also, humans can hold Stormlight longer and use it more efficiently as they progress with their oaths, right? So, like, because Zeth is just holding an honor blade and it has no real other connection to honor, that's why he's so inefficient with his Stormlight, right? I think we kind of got to, do a separate episode about who's doing what, where, when during the night of Gavilar's assassination.
Oh, yeah.
Because that, there's, that same that same night gets revisited in each of the prologues for the first 5 books. A bunch of other, kind of little things. The Windspren play pranks on people by making things stick together. And I really like that as laying the groundwork for their relationship to the Windrunners and Honor Spren.
And bonds.
Right, and their bonds, right, where when a Radiant bonds an Honor Spren and progresses far enough in their oaths, it's Windspren who form that Windrunners, plate. But, so Windspren don't, so they have that, relationship to the Surge of adhesion, right? And I just thought that was a nice little thing. There's a few references to how important acoustics are to how things work on Roshar.
And I want to keep calling them harmonics, but that's not the name.
No. So there's the cymatics, the diagrams of the cities that, are formed by dropping sand on a particular plate and then playing a note nearby. And that's a real thing that you can do in real life, right? You can drop sand and it won't make the shape of a city or anything, but it will make, neat diagrams depending on the notes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can see the sound waves almost.
Yeah, something. I'm not. Acoustics is hard, but it's the fact that it comes up here is sort of laying the groundwork for how important acoustics is in the Cosmere and in particular on Roshar. And there's a few other references where when Yasna soulcasts the boulder, to save Teravangian's grandchild, Shallan hears a pure note that plays. That's laying groundwork for pure tones of Roshar, right?
Yeah, way too subtle for me.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, if I hadn't been on the lookout for it, I wouldn't have noticed. And, like I said, I was on the lookout for things, and you still caught things I didn't. Sort of continuing on that, Shallan later draws a memory of Shallan, of Yasna soulcasting the boulder, and she mentions something that is a bit of lore that really echoed with what I know about the Dawn Shards, right? She, I guess to quote, She calls Yasna, wielding the Soulcaster, a heretic wielding one of the most sacred powers in all the world. The power of change itself, the power by which the Almighty created Roshar. He had another name, only allowed to pass the lips of Ardents, Elethanithia, he who transforms. And that little bit of lore is complicated, right? Where, we sort of know from, I think it's been confirmed in Wind and Truth now, so it's not just Word of Brandon, that Roshar was created by Adonalsium, not Honor the Almighty. And we know from Dawn Shard, that the novella Dawn Shard, that there was a Dawn Shard with the command to change, stored on Roshar, right?
We don't really know what Dawn Shards are, by the way.
We don't know what they are, but we do know that they have a command. Each of the Dawn Shards has a command associated with it. And one of those is to change, right? To transform. So that bit... it resonated with me much in the way that something might resonate with acoustics. Anyway, I was trying to go for a pun and I just completely dropped it out of my head. Let's see, there's a few other things that I've got just to continue.
Well, I've got one.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of Herald watch here. And Shallan is one of the times Shallan is in the stacks. She doesn't call it the stacks, but anyways. Yeah. When she's in the stacks, the Palanaeum, she says, it turned out to be just an old, berobed female ardent, with her figure hidden but the light streaming between the shelves. It looked as if one of the heralds themselves were walking through the stacks. And,
it was.
Ba-da-ba-da-bum. I think some clever readers were able to figure this out before, but definitely confirmed in Wind and Truth that one of the heralds was... an ardent.
Which herald is that? Batar? Whatever. I don't remember all the heralds' names. There's only 10 of them. Why can't I remember? Whatever.
So anyways, that was a herald. So that was definitely one of Brandon's moments where he's just like, "Ha, I told you."
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't believe me at the time, but I told you that was a herald. Kind of things.
So In chapter 12, I don't know why I wrote down the specific chapter. There's a quote about one might say that gods, as a rule, should fear the Alethi nobility. Most of us, at least. And like,
Yeah, I had that written down.
it's clearly supposed to be, like, oh, that is some irony, right? It's intended as a dig at Dalinar, but also he's the only one there who like actually becomes a leader in a fight against gods, and arguably does kill a god,
Dalinar, yeah.
even if it is himself. Anyway, but it's like, that's some juicy, some very good irony. Loved it. And also, like, the gods, as a rule, do fear Dalinar specifically, right?
Right.
Like, cultivation, odium, and eventually honor all have interactions with him where, yes, they do become afraid of Dalinar at various points. So, chef's kiss. Love that. We talked about this in our Interludes episode, but the description of Dalinar's visit to the Night Watcher, immediately sandwiched by other people describing their experiences with the Night Watcher, there's a subtle clue that Dalinar is the odd one out, and that his experience visiting the Night Watcher and his boon and his curse don't match. They don't match. And that so his visit with the old magic was influenced by something else. Cultivation, as it turns out.
More dramatic irony. Kaladin, I think it's Kaladin says this. He says, the first step is to care. It's the difference between fighting to defend your homeland and fighting on foreign soil, which is a lot of dramatic irony for us, because we know that the Parshendi are actually the people who are trying to defend their homeland, and humans are the invaders.
I mean,
which is all kinds of messed up, just like it is here on Earth in the real world.
I still don't
Or
think it's
like-
as straightforward as that, where there is a point where those humans don't have any other homeland, right? The Rosharan humans don't have any other homeland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is hammered in explicitly in
Cosmere is a big
Oathbringer.
place. Why
right?
did I have to land here?
Well, not even just that. It's like, well, but the Alethi, they are Alethi. It's been their ancestral homeland for literally thousands of years. If it's not their homeland, fuck,
It's all kinds of messed up,
It
just
is.
like it is in the real world.
right? But
There's more to say on that, but let's pin it there. I still think the command to unite them is a little vague. I mean, Dalinar understood it to be unite the Alethi. Then I think we're supposed to understand that it's unite the Radiants to be able to kind of fight against Odium. But is it more unite?
I don't think it's actually
Uniting
the
the shards.
Radiants. Right. I was about to say, I don't think it's uniting the Radiants, because the very last thing that Tanavas did in Wind of Truth before dying was share visions with all of the Radiants, basically get them to forsake their oaths.
Right.
Right? Because he didn't want them to be on, so it's like, so that vision, which also came from honor, like, it wouldn't make sense for him to be talking about uniting the Radiants when he's done everything he can to subvert that, right?
Right.
In my opinion, which is just an opinion, it's definitely more unite the other shards.
Layers and layers of understanding to go on there.
I mean, it could be unite the Alethi. It's not, but it could be. I mean, or, you know what? It could be the
It's not unite the Alethi.
right. It could be, frankly, it could also be just the ravings of a dying god with, too much investiture. And, it's just, honor likes to unite things. The honor,
could
the
just be
power likes to unite things and bind them together. It could just be unite.
We also find out by the end of this series about, kind of as we learn more about soulcasters, but why soulcasting is hidden behind screens and all that stuff. It's just so that your average person doesn't realize that people who are doing the soulcasting are kind of slowly disappearing the more they soulcast. Because that's kind of something that comes up again and again in this book. Not that often, but enough
That
where
they're
it's
hidden,
like, there's something here. There's a reason why that it's being hidden.
Well, but it's also sort of like, it also fits for the vibes, right? Like, soulcasters are these holy relics, and in real life, like, there are all sorts of religions where something is too holy to look at, right? I mean, shit, that comes up in the end of Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's too holy to see, too holy to look at.
Okay, no, we'll talk about that another time.
I'm like, I'm out of notes here.
Just-
I know you had 4 pages to my lonely 2.
All right, 3 bullet points. I'll do them real quick. Unresolved foreshadowing. Noadon. Who the fuck is Noadon? There's more going on with Noadon than simply a figure in history. I mean, he's not a herald, but he's got to be some kind of invested being.
Can I tell you a fan theory I've read online?
Sure.
Oh, this might fit better. There's a fan theory I've read that he's an avatar for another shard, possibly wisdom.
Interesting. Okay. Well, anyways, the visions with Noadon are very different, and you probably have noticed that.
Yeah.
That's throughout the series. Shallan's father, like, he was definitely involved, like, Shallan's mother was a herald, yes, but Shallan's father, something was going on with him. Like,
why were the Ghostbloods interested in him in the first place?
yeah,
right?
and he's had maps. They were planning stuff. Like, none of that was answered in Arc 1, which is really aggravating. Especially when they say that, like, Shallan goes around with this really awesome crew on the Wind's Pleasure. And they talk about being Devar men we are, indebted to your family. And like, how is this really nice crew indebted to this horrible person?
I was trying to keep track of who all was Ghostbloods, and especially who all associated with the Devars was Ghostblood, and I could not make heads or tails of the Wind's Pleasure.
I don't know.
I know you were telling me yesterday or something that Yalb has to have more
I'm
going
pretty
on
sure
with
Yalb
him.
is a sleepless.
No,
He's a sleepless or a Chondra. I don't know. Something. We can talk about that later. Okay, let's end it there.
All right. Thanks, dear, for podcasting with me. No thanks to the kids throwing tantrums off screen.
Causing us to pause about 10 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for podcasting with me.
Yeah. Thanks, audience, for audiencing to us. Our email address is cosmerecasual@gmail.com. Our handle on social media, whatever it is, Reddit, Instagram, I don't freaking know, is Cosmerecasual. Our intro and outro music is licensed through Tribe of Noise. The artist is Ketsa, and the song is Odyssey.
And until next time, keep your wits about you.